I was just amazed that that I was meeting people who were in their 30s and could speak English beautifully, and yet they had these memories of like this pre-industrial age and a childhood where, animist beliefs just formed their worldview. And I just found that fascinating. So I went, I remember at the time I just had my phone and I said, oh, I have to record this. Like I didn't have any agenda. I just thought it was so magical in the way this was Lundulf I'm talking about, the school teacher. He just had a
Mm.
lovely musical way of speaking and just this sense of delight in how he spoke. It was just so beautiful. I thought, oh, I have to record this. And it was only like a couple of years later, really, that I took it seriously and I thought, okay, I could make something out of this. Yeah, so I thought maybe I'd have extended captions with a portrait, and then I became a bit more bold as I kept going, and locals got excited about it as well, which was really lovely. And I'd just be sitting in a local cafe with Lundup and Norbu and Meme Chonjo, the former monk who built the road, just walk past and say, "Oh, you have to talk to him. He's got an amazing story." And this was before anyone had heard about him, so his story. So just really evolved in a really lovely, natural way. So, and like particularly as a foreigner, you go in and you think, well, this isn't my story to tell. And, in a place like Australia, I don't think I'd be too terrified. But I think just the fact that every time I went back, I didn't know anyone who was doing it. And, things were disappearing and I could almost sense, things would be gone so quickly. And in a way, not being Indian, it helped because I was a bit more impartial in a way because, yeah, so there's a long
Mm.
answer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I was reading the book, I was thinking that every part of India, I mean, because in the last 30 years, we've changed so much that
Mm,
every part of India has stories like this, or like places that have been cut off, and now everybody's kind of urban and, they connected and, so that, and I'm so glad that, but because Zanskar was always remote,
mm,
so it's multiplied that effect, right? So when you first went in, then you went on that truck and you hitchhiked, and that whole description of it was so lovely, and about, but also what came out was the, I mean, I don't know how to say this, but yes, in reminiscences, these people are all saying, this place was great and the relationships and all. And then when you come to the untouchable community within them, that's when when you realize that, oh my God, you know, the Indian subcontinent has serious problems, and this is one of the big ones. Social
mm,
problems. You want to talk about that, and you brought that out because at first I thought, when you were describing, I said, "Oh, they're so different. They're not like us so much."
mm,
Because which I noticed even when I was there. I used to think, "Wow, Buddhism and this society is kind of very different from
mm.
in terms of discrimination." But well, clearly, everybody has these sore points. You want to talk about that and how you brought that out?
How I came across that, or
Yeah, yeah, you can also how you came across it, because from the outside it's very difficult to tell, right?
yeah. And people, outsiders tend to romanticize Buddhism. I know I did after lots of time,
Yeah,
in the Himalayas. I had no idea there were like monk warriors in the past, and
yeah,
it was,
yeah.
I think it was actually, I don't think I would have known about them if it hadn't been through, because of the pandemic. I spent a lot of time searching through the archives of the Times of India and looking at, the India archives. And that's when I came across some stories about the conflict in Padum at the time in 2012.
Mhm.
So um, then I proceeded really carefully because, you have this thing where you'll well, this was my experience anyway. You'll meet one person, and this is how I made all my introductions because, most of the time I was there was no phone coverage and it wasn't anything I organized.
Hmm.
I'd go there and I'd meet one Buddhist person who then introduced me to their friend who also happened to be Buddhist, and most people are Buddhist. So I felt like, oh, okay, I'm not meeting any Muslims, and I had to, in the same way I wasn't really hearing women's stories, so I had to consciously go and look for it.
Hmm.
So I really felt like I was missing the Muslim side of the story. Um, and so I had to consciously go in and be a little bit forceful and say to somebody, hey, I read this story in the newspaper about this conflict happening in Padam. And I waited right until the end of my journey to do that because I knew that, it
Yeah, we
was,
are very sensitive. I mean,
yeah,
everyone in India is very sensitive about
yeah,
trust. So,
yeah.
yeah.
um, and yeah, and as I said in the book, they said used a derogatory word for the people who'd converted and said, oh yeah, they work at this shop. They didn't normally. I'd be taken along and say, oh, this is my friend. Da, da, da. And so I just
Hmm.
went there, and they were just. It was quite moving to see how much they wanted to tell their story, actually,
Oh.
and they said, the one thing you can do is please be balanced in what you're saying.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was a shame because I think because I knew my Buddhist friends there so well, some of, it's like anywhere else. You've got some people who are really open and will say anything, other people who are always
Yes.
polite, and
Yeah.
different personalities. And the one guy, a couple of guys I'd spoken to, one of them is, oh, they just wanted to make change too quickly, and the other one was, oh, I always feel sad for them. um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I I struggled to get much of the Buddhist point of view on that story, to be honest. Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, because there's the people who could kick me out.
Yeah, that's true.
That was a thing for me. But
Yeah, and if they didn't even listen to the Dalai Lama,
no, they're not going to come to this Australian. Yeah, but I did try and show sympathy, and I think it's pretty clear the pressures the
yeah.
community is under. Um, And I even just think my introduction with Hussein, the truck driver, I mean, he was such a lovely, gentle character. I was so lucky to have that as,
Mm.
my
Yeah.
introduction to a Buddhist man, a Muslim man with so many Buddhist relatives and,
Yes.
you
Yeah,
know,
I would have, I mean, I was quite surprised. I thought, it was more separate, but in the story you mentioned how like half the women in his family are Buddhist. And actually it's not so strange because if people live together and in earlier times, I mean, yeah, there were intermarriages and it's only now that kind of the lines are becoming more sharper, I guess, within
yeah.
communities. So he brought that out as well in his personality, right?
Yeah, I
So,
do think because of the environment, and as I mentioned before, people in the past have been a very strongly conformist society just because they needed to work together, and so
yes.
the and other writers have mentioned that they saw that they've never seen conflict so um, strictly avoided. It's only a very
Mm.
recent thing that
Yeah, I guess
yeah,
modernity is responsible for these things. I guess maybe in earlier times, like you've mentioned, because everybody's working together in the fields, they're like sharing their stuff, so it's not. So they can't afford to stop talking to each other and not support each other, I guess.
and the risk is in a way that if you're just going for a short visit, or even after I visited a few times, I still didn't see that other side, the talk
Mm.
about domestic violence and um, yeah, discrimination and what things were like for women.